there's this awakening starting. And some days I just, give up hope because it's like, wow, you're looking at the speed of collapse and you're like, well, the speed of waking up is way too slow. There's no way we can do it now. Like, and the science and the thing, it looks impossible. But isn't that like every story we've ever heard? Like we're at the gates of Mordor and there's no hope, and the chemicals arrayed against us are so massive in scale that it just seems like biology cannot possibly survive. And yet biology sits there and says, well, it's not this day. We're going to keep going. There may be an extinction someday, but it's not this day because nature is here and willing to wrap us back up, put her back in the womb, put us back in the womb, and regrow this thing. And so this is the journey we're on. And when we get dim enough that we can no longer do anything, nature will take her first breath again, and she'll pull us into a future, and there will be a few of us that survive that and go on to create a different relationship to her and create a different society.
Welcome back to Reconditioned with me, Lauren Backneen. And oh my goodness, what a way to kick off season 14. Guys, this season, I cannot tell you the incredible guests I have lined up. So really stay tuned. If you're not subscribed already, click that subscribe or follow button right now, because you're going to want to be here for this season 14. How we got here. Wow, 5 years later. Proud of myself. But this episode, I mean, I had two major kind of top tier guest manifestations, and they are Dr. Joe Dispenza and Dr. Zach Bush. And this episode, I am happy to tell you, is Dr. Zach Bush. And as he says in the episode, he's quite open to being manifested these days. So I did something right. And wow, what an episode this was. 2 hours spent being able to ask Dr. Zach Bush anything that I wanted to, all of the questions I had written down, and then some. Well, there's loads we missed as well, loads of questions I wanted to ask, but we were going on for so long. If you're not watching the video, do head over to YouTube and watch the video of this, because we did do this when he was in London, in a studio in London, which is always lovely to be with people in person. And just kind of an FYI on why I stopped with the studio that I was doing a few seasons back. It was too stressful for me. Number one, to manage the scheduling of their schedule and me fitting into that with my very busy life with kids and business and school runs and everything. And, trying to run this business alongside being as present as I can for my children. But also we would record episodes and I would have, this is the kind of stuff that you talk about that it doesn't always fit into 45 minutes or an hour. And sometimes in the studio, someone would be scheduled in after me and they'd be rushing me and I'd be speaking about, I remember speaking to Aaron Abke, excuse me, about Kundalini and sexual energy. And we were like in the middle of this incredible conversation about Kundalini energy. And then I was being told to hurry up. So it really didn't work. And, to be honest, I didn't see the downloads go up when I was, using the studio and had all those incredible professional audio and videos and everything. So here I am back recording this intro in my home office, but the video of my interview with Zach Bush is on YouTube. We do post all the videos, even if they're zoomed in with the guest over Zoom. And I don't think you guys really mind. The interview is the interview, but for me, it was amazing being in person with him. Wow, did I get to ask him some questions and get some answers and feel kind of really inspired and excited about life. Because, as any of you who follow Dr. Zach Bush will know, we've damaged our planet. We have done a lot of damage to ourselves and our planet, but it isn't all bad. And there is some hope there, which he speaks about. And that was really inspiring. But generally, I don't think I've ever spoken to anyone who is as knowledgeable and at the same time being so in tune with truth, with cosmic energy, with energy, while holding that kind of real knowledge of health and wellness and the truth of what wellness actually is. So if you're here because you're into wellness and holistic living and holistic healing, this episode truly is what speaks to all of that. So, one other person that I do feel comes up to that, I lie, is Charles Eisenstein. The episode I did with Charles Eisenstein was brilliant. If you haven't listened to that yet, do search it. But anyway, so Dr. Zach Bush, and we do have some incredible guests coming up the rest of the season. So again, make sure you subscribe and follow the podcast because there's some exciting stuff happening here. So I will probably just stop talking now because nothing else I can say will really, just give this episode what it deserves in terms of what I can say about it beforehand. It truly is everything we need to know about wellness and healing and connecting with the planet and connecting back to self. There's a lot of emotion in the episode and it's just beautiful, and I'm excited for you guys to hear it. So I will leave you now with this episode that I recorded in London with Dr. Zach Bush. And as usual, if you enjoy the episode, please do share this with your friends. This is the kind of information that can help people. If you are in the wellness world, this isn't about biohacks and machines and what supplements you can take. Wellness is wholeness. It is community. It is growth. And sharing that with community, sharing that with your community, building your community, inspiring others. For me, that's what wellness is. It really isn't about all that other stuff. And I will just say as well that when Zach talks about his ion gut supplement that is changing the world quite literally, we do have codes for that, discount code that you can get that for 10% off in the UK and if you're listening in the US. So please head to the show notes and you'll get the links and the codes for both of those. I've been giving this to my kids for about 4 years, I think, and taking it myself. And I think it's one of the most potent. I mean, it's not even a supplement. Like he says, it's so hard to explain. So listen to the episode. But one of the most potent elixirs, I guess, that we can implement into our daily wellness toolkit. So without further ado, here is Dr. Zach Bush. If you've chosen to listen to this podcast, I probably don't need to tell you about the importance of connecting with the Earth's electromagnetic field daily, a lot, if we want to optimize health. Spending more time grounding, i.e. barefoot on the earth, actually helps the healing process and boosts immune function. But the reality is that most of us just aren't outdoors enough to get the full benefits of connecting with the natural frequencies of the earth. Even our footwear blocks this connection. So what do? Well, enter earthing sheets. I have an earthing sheet in my bed from Roland Earthing, and I've not only noticed an improvement in my sleep quality, yay, but also an improvement in overall vitality. By sleeping on an earthing sheet, you restore the electrical connection to the earth that you miss out on by not being on the earth enough during sleep, replicating being grounded in nature. And it works best this way because our bodies repair while we sleep, and we're there for ages. So really, this is the most valuable time to maximize efficiency of your earthing practice. The sheets are made from organic cotton and they just go under your bed sheet. And not just that, Roland Earthing donates 1% of all sales to Farmers Footprint, Zach Bush's amazing charitable organization, which really means a lot to me. Earthing sheets are also said to be really great for children with sleep issues and cognitive challenges. So all in all, I couldn't recommend these earthing sheets enough. And you can get a 5% discount by visiting rolandearthing.co.uk. That's ROWLAND earthing.co.uk. And use the code Lauren5 to get a great 5% discount off your first order. Welcome, Zach Bush, probably probably the top manifestation to have on this podcast. So, very honored to have you here.
Well, thanks for manifesting me into reality here. I appreciate that.
It's quite easy, really, isn't it? Once you get the manifestation
I'm
stuff
pretty
in.
willing to be manifested these days, it feels like.
So I'm just going to quickly read out your bio, which because I know my audience love that, and just to kind of get the background on you, and then we'll go into your story a bit more.
Short as possible.
So Zach Bush, MD, is a physician specializing in internal medicine, endocrinology, and hospice care. He's an internationally recognized educator and thought leader on the microbiome as it relates to health, disease, and food systems. Dr. Bush founded Seraphic Group and the non-profit Farmers Footprint to develop root cause solutions for human and ecological health. His passion for education reaches across many disciplines, including topics such as the role of soil and water ecosystems in human genomics, immunity, and gut-brain health. His education has highlighted the need for a radical departure from chemical farming and pharmacy, and his ongoing efforts are providing a path for consumers, farmers, and mega industries to work together for a healthy future for people and the planet. I mean, just reading that there's a lot in there, but what you do goes so deep into just what you're doing to help heal the planet and help people understand what healing actually means, I think. And listening to you over the years, and I've been listening to you and following your work for many years, it's like it's a true understanding of what the meaning of health and wholeness is for us and our planet. I know you have told this story so many times, but for my mainly UK-based audience, who some of whom might not have heard of you, if you're able to just give a little bit of background on yourself and how you came to what you do.
The seeds were planted pretty early for me. I was very much a blue-collar kid. Grew up in a interesting point in time in that the Vietnam War was just wrapping up, and there was a huge amount of refugees from Cambodia from the war that were displaced into the United States, and a large portion of these Hmong people, which was the indigenous group there in Cambodia, were put into Boulder, Colorado, where I was born and raised, to kind of two hippie parents that were in this kind of, chosen path of poverty that movement was making, kind of a rejection of economic wealth, and all of this was kind of part of the ethos that my parents' generation was trying to forge into, and that collided with this refugee kind of environment. So grew up in government housing with these amazing Hmong families, and what they had that the Americans didn't have was culture, and that culture was based in the soil. And so they taught my mother how to garden. They taught, really all of us how to live in some ways, in that when you're in government housing, kind of low-income housing, poverty is such a stressor in our modern societies. And with that stress comes a lot of dysfunction, substance abuse and domestic violence, and all these things are just kind of almost an accepted part of the stress of poverty as we understand it in the North and West. But in indigenous cultures that still understand their role within place, the abundance of nature, the role of nature within their lives, there isn't poverty. There may be, a low economic generator or whatever, and maybe little changes over time because there's not lots of pressure for change in economy. But there's not really poverty as we know it in the North and West. And unfortunately, we've externalized or exported this, concept of economic, growth and economic metrics on the world. And so we've created poverty globally now. But what I got to see with the Hmong people was just this deep sense of the provision of nature. And so outside of our government housing complex was this little plot of community gardens that they kind of took over. And it was a little 10 foot by 10 foot, 3-meter square that each woman had. And it was delineated by this little white string on little sticks. And she would squat in the middle of her garden with the stick that was just long enough that she could kind of reach the entire perimeter while she told stories back and forth to the other women squatting in the middle of their plots. And so these women were dressed in their traditional garb, black gowns down to the ground, embroidered with just phenomenal colors. And so they looked like flowers to me as a kid. I remember walking across this little gutter plank to get out to the community gardens to find my mom. And these women would be squatting like these kind of flowers in the middle of these gardens. And that was an early seed in my memory that I saw people super resilient here, displaced tens of thousands of kilometers from their home and, torn away from their own place and culture. And yet they brought it all with them somehow. And that with them started at the soil for them. And so as long as they had their garden and they had their food, their traditional food was their grounding rod of how they passed love from generation to generation, is through the way they prepare the meals and the way their grandmother taught them to prepare the meals. And so there was this nurture that was just part of culture. And for a kid growing up in the West of the United States, you have no history. I mean, my state of Colorado was, founded in the late 1800s. So, there's just no history. There's no depth to it. And so suddenly having this culture that's tens of thousands of years old thrust into the middle of this, kind of pseudo culture of the hippies that was a culture that had been born 5 years before, to have this tens of thousands of years of gravity there, I think really shaped my reality in subconscious ways as I went through life. And it wouldn't be until many years later that I ended up, at 19 years old, I ended up going to the Philippines, decided to take a year off before going into my engineering program that I wanted to go into. And my aunt had reached out, at the same moment that I had decided I was going to take a year off. She was calling my folks and she asked what I was doing. I said, taking a year off. She's like, you should come birth babies in the Philippines. And I had never done anything medical in my life. And she said that they would train me on the job, and it sounded super interesting and like travel and everything that a 19-year-old kid would want to do. So got myself to the Philippines, and all of that stuff that I had seen in the Hmong people started to like really present itself in front of me with these women in abject poverty, demonstrating the power of the feminine to bring life into the world, and watching children come out of the womb of women that have no access to food, live on dirt floors, squalor, open sewage. Like, you just can't get too much more degraded in social and economic function and yet these babies were being born perfectly. And it was just such a contrast of nature's perfection to the broken systems of humanity. And that's kind of where I started to generate from. And so over the last, 30 years since then, I've been systematically kind of moving towards a desire to see those two worlds kind of merge. Like, how do we solve for the crisis of human systems and the deep poverty that happens? And I think the darker poverty that happens in humanity is not really a monetary one. It's a poverty of connection. It's a isolation event. And that loneliness that occurs in the heart of every human now is so deep and so complete that we are bringing ourselves to the end. We no longer have fertility as a species. We have 1 in 3 males infertile on the planet now. In vitro fertilization has become normal, not just in the West, but every country now is relying on in vitro fertilization to try to, stall this inevitable collapse of fertility that's happening. And so for me, this is just one story in the end of, there was a humanity that was here for tens of thousands of years that understood itself within the context of nature. And then we went through some sort of universal abandonment event where we felt deeply abandoned by nature and we felt deeply rejected by our own planet. And for that wound, we developed addiction disorders. And our addictions are a myriad. We're addicted to economies and drugs and sex and whatever, people can try to fill that void with. And in the end, it's just one story of humanity forgot we are of Earth, and there's a different path forward for us in healing now, where instead of like trying to like reverse the disease, we simply remember the original design. And so that's kind of my passion and purpose on the planet right now, is can we bring focus to a different path where we just remember an original design.
Some of you may remember that towards the end of 2024, I had a bit of an inflammatory flare-up. Now, having been in remission for so long, it was quite challenging. And even with all my tools and the best practitioners at my fingertips, it wasn't shifting. And there were many reasons for that, but a friend told me about the energy enhancement system that has taken off like crazy in the States, but it had just opened in the UK. And I really was trying everything I could to heal, so I went to check it out. Honestly, safe to say, I've never looked back. And if you're suffering with anything from autoimmune conditions to mental health challenges to cancer, even if your pet is unwell, please stick with me for 60 seconds while I tell you what this incredible system of healing is. So EES creates special energy fields using scalar waves and biophotons that allow your body to return to a place of homeostasis and balance, because that's the frequency our bodies should be vibrating at when in a state of wholeness. These fields help to balance and optimize your body's natural processes, promoting healing and overall well-being. I've personally now had 2 daytime sessions and have also stayed overnight twice, giving my body 11 hours of recharging within the scalar waves. And all I can say, and my friends who I sent say the same, is I've never fallen into a deeper meditation or a more relaxed state than when I'm in there, showing me that it's absolutely doing something with my energy field, thereby promoting wellness. The energy enhancement system promotes the body's ability to detox, reduce inflammation, reduce pain, improve circulation, improve sleep quality, improve immune function. It regenerates cells and it balances the right and left hemispheres of the brain, which is why we go into such deep meditation when we're in there. And that's just the beginning. Guys, the body is designed to heal from everything and anything. And when it's synchronizing with the healthy, energetic environment generated by the system, it can. They're based in London. I cannot recommend it enough. And you can get 18% off any length session by using code reconditioned18 when booking. That's reconditioned18. Just visit www.energyenhancementcentre.co.uk to book, or you can head to the show notes for all the links. I cannot wait to hear your success stories. And please note, EES do not make any medical claims. At what point in your medical career did it start making sense to, or did the medical world, the allopathic world, stop making sense to you, and you kind of started getting an understanding that something's not working, or something, the disconnect that you speak about?
The beauty of nature was like my intro in some ways. So watching these babies emerge from these women in the Philippines was the beginning of it. And it wasn't just the women giving birth, it was the women that were helping, hold space for those births to happen. It was an international group of midwives from all over the world working together in these states of intense poverty. And the confidence that those midwives had was something when I thought I was going to the vaunted halls of, allopathic medicine. I went to some of the best universities that you can go to in this space. I was just blessed with a great journey into academia, despite having no intellectual track record to suggest I should be there. But doors just opened that normally wouldn't have opened, and I ended up in this space. And what I didn't see was the level of confidence and assuredness that I saw in these midwives and these women birthing babies. And so here we were in quaternary referral centers, like the fanciest university hospitals in the world, with the most incredible technologies on the planet. And birthing babies in those environments looks like a trauma. Like it's just traumatic. Traumatic for baby, traumatic for mother. And so that began this dissonance in me at that point of like, what did they have in the Philippines? What do these midwives have that I must just need more education so that I can be more confident? That's how I ended up being a triple board certified doctor. It was not because I'm smart. It was because I was desperately looking for the confidence that I had seen in these women who were birthing babies in states of abject poverty with no technology other than their own wisdom and their own presence around these women. And to this day, I can tell you that I just never found it in academia. I never found that level of confidence in self. There's a lot of heady, I think egoic wielding of technology that is a shield against that insecurity. But I went to the top of academia to find out that it's kind of a house of cards when it comes to actual truth, and to the credit of my medical school, my dean came in on my very first day of medical school and he said, over the next 4 years, you're going to learn more than you can ever imagine learning, and you'll forget more than most people will have the opportunity to learn in their lives. And the only problem is that 50% of everything we're going to teach you is wrong. And the worst news is we don't actually know which 50% that is. And so it was something that I then forgot for many years, and then remembered later on in my career that on the first day he admitted that this is what you're going to find. And it took me almost 2 decades subsequently in search of that truth that would give me a sense of security, when he had told me originally that this is not true. Like, you're going to learn a bunch of, and I guess my conclusion at the end of 17 years in academia by 2010 when I left was that I had figured out which 50% was wrong, and it was 50% of everything. Everything was half truths. Nothing's completely wrong. Everything's half wrong. And half wrong is really hard to discern when everything's half wrong, because you can't be like, well, there's whole truth and there's half truth. And so the pharmaceutical model, the belief that some chemical not natural to your body is going to actually improve the intelligence and capacity of your body to achieve health, is, in hindsight, it's the most ridiculous premise on the planet. But it took me going all the way to the extreme of designing chemotherapy. As an endocrinologist, my expertise was in hormones and mitochondria, which is metabolism. And so in studying mitochondria, started to realize that you could predict cancer and treat cancer at the mitochondrial level instead of at the human cell level, and it completely changed the game. And so the chemotherapy I was working on was basically giving nutritional information to mitochondria that was allowing them to make a decision of, am I cancer or am I not? If I'm cancer, then I'm going to eliminate the cell that I'm living in. So instead of trying to poisoning cells, you could actually nourish cells, and then the mitochondria nourished would eliminate the problem. So it was a very exciting time, and I was able to go from benchtop research to a clinical trial in 3 years, which is, 7 times quicker than usual. And so there was this fantastic excitement around me and within me that, we're going to change the face of cancer care. And it was my very first patient in my very first clinical trial that pretty much ended my entire academic career. And she sat there late at night when I was admitting her to the clinical research center to get this trial drug. And I had put these 6 actually the nurse had come in what looked like a hazmat suit and dumped these 6 capsules into this woman's hand. And she's like, the nurse is in a hazmat suit and now I'm holding these in my hand. You want me to put these in my body? And so I spent the next hour using the most powerful tools I knew how to wield at the time in medicine to get patients to do what we needed them to do, which was fear, guilt, and shame. So I put fear in her that the cancer has no other solution and you've got kids and, everything. And then guilt her for, not doing everything she can, and then shame her for the kids. And I had to use all these emotional tools. Subconsciously, I was using these things to get her to do what I felt like was her only path to health. And so as altruistic as my heart was, I spent an hour breaking this woman's connection to her intuition. And in that process, she asked one question that was kind of the demise of everything, which was, what do these 6 capsules have to do with the reason I have cancer? And that suddenly, that was a question that should have never been asked to any doctor, because the answer is there's not a single drug on the market that has anything to do with the reason you got a disease. And so that was suddenly the emperor had no clothes. And it was a very intense moment that set into motion a kind of a deconstruction of my whole world over the next 18 months. Basically, that whole academic career kind of fell apart in this realization that I was going down a pathway that had no end, and it was absolutely not at the beginning of anything. It was a Band-Aid that you throw on at the end of a long process of separation from nature. And so that became my opposite path. Is left in 2010 and started a nutrition center for working in food and nutrition that could reverse chronic disease by reconnecting people to the nurture of nature through food. And I had to learn nutrition on the fly because I was a medical doctor. I knew absolutely nothing about nutrition. And so it was my patients who really taught me so much. And that took us together as a group of patients in rural Virginia, 5th generation poverty. It took us into this journey together where they started planting gardens and we were eating from gardens and we were part of each other's lives. That's the one problem with medical field, maybe at a deep level, is you're not connected to your patients in any way. You're not responsible for them. You don't know how they're living. You don't know what their life looks like. And to suddenly be a country doc, the only doctor serving 40,000 people in a rural community, you have no choice but to end up meeting these people. And there's really nothing more magical than actually developing a relationship with people that are looking to you for help and confident enough to help you on your journey. And so they became my best teachers and they became my best, colleagues, I think, ultimately. And they were willing to push hard to find solutions that I hadn't been taught. And what we ended up finding was a bunch of indigenous wisdom out in the world. So we found Ayurvedic nutrition, 9,000 years of nutrition science. We had Chinese medicine, acupuncture, Reiki, and Japanese energy work. We had novel new energy field medicine techniques that were integrated into our clinic. And so it became just this amazing petri dish for the possibilities that nature has never allowed an injury that she didn't already have a solution to. And that was my journey into trust, I think, ultimately, in myself, maybe, was the longest journey. And so I started to trust that I was part of the medicine and I didn't need something outside of myself to give to my patients. I was the medicine. If I would sit and listen long enough, my patient would tell me why they had a disease and what they would do to heal the disease. And so that shift from the doer, the wounded masculine running around trying to fix everything, to just a much more curious, listening. And I'm still trying to do that. I'm still learning, still healing myself.
But educating us a lot on the way.
Yeah, I mean, if I've ever educated anybody, it's just sharing how I've learned. And I think that's one thing for all of you to think about is education took me into oblivion. It took me into an abstract reality that wasn't rooted in anything. Everything was half truth. In contrast to that education came experiential learning. And experiential learning is where truth is found. And so for all of us, we need to exit our British educations that have this become the norm globally. You can go to rural Africa, rural India, and it's all British schools. And so this colonialism as an economic power found its most insidious, potent takeover in the form of education rather than militaries. And so our education has become this deep conquest of human creativity in some ways. And our creativity has been stripped out of us. And we're taught to memorize things instead of actually know something. We're taught to regurgitate information rather than experience information. And the contrast is I think it's going to take us quite some generations to turn that around, but we have to now. So that's good news. We can't go too much further down this path that we're currently on. So that's the good news about slamming into brick walls is got to switch directions.
I want to ask you about education in a bit, but I'd like to go kind of back to, you left the medical world, you left allopathic medicine, but you made some incredible discoveries, and you focus a lot on glyphosate and what glyphosate's done to the planet. And it's kind of a hard pill to swallow hearing about where we're at with that, but I'd love for you to kind of share a little bit about that.
I'll premise this because I always forget to premise this. This is all good news. Everything you're about to hear is actually our path. This is the human journey. And so we needed glyphosate just like we needed a war. So this is a good thing in the end. And so if I forget to come back to what's the good part, remind me to get there because it does sound just dismal. And it is a dismal story. It's a dark story, literally. So to understand this, I think that maybe I'll start with defining life. Physics is what defines most of the universe. So natural law as it relates to physics is things like gravity and the way in which light can be a wave or a particle. And there's all these phenomenal, concepts within natural law that are dictated by physics. The brightest thing that physics does is nuclear fission and fusion, and we call those stars or suns. And so the brightest thing physics does is a sun. That energy radiates out and hits the surface of a planet. And if the planet is fortunate enough to have water and carbon capable of dancing together, then you end up with a cataclysmic concentration of light energy. And what's happening as you move from physics to biology is a condensation or concentration of light energy. For the first bacteria to form, you're looking at about 1,000-fold jump in the amount of energy per cubic centimeter from the sun to life. And so to get 1,000 times more energy than the surface of the sun per cubic centimeter, you have to have a process of releasing sunlight from molecules. And the molecules that hold sunlight are glucose and fatty acids. So carbohydrates and fats are basically batteries for solar energy. And these molecules are so tiny that they can cram an enormous amount of battery power into very small spaces. And so the way in which that happens on our planet is largely through chlorophyll, which is a small mitochondria that's specialized inside of plants to take CO2 and store light energy between the two carbons. And that turns into a string of carbons. And that string, depending on its shape, is either a carbohydrate or a fat, but both sugar and fat are just the same thing. They're solar energy. That courses into our bloodstream after a meal, and our liver repackages it and sends it out to the whole system, and it has to be absorbed into human cells and then passaged to the mitochondria, which are the guys inside of our cells that will break those carbons back apart. So chlorophyll is putting the carbons together with solar energy, mitochondria are breaking those apart and releasing light into the system. So the way in which that's done in a bacteria is through fermentation. The way in which it's done in a multicellular creature like an earthworm or a human is through these mitochondria. And mitochondria do it through something called respiratory physiology or respiratory energy production. And so it's the dance of oxygen, carbon, CO2, and all these things that allow a tenfold increase in concentration of light energy from a single-celled bacteria to a single human cell. So our human cells are about 10 times brighter than bacteria and fungi per cubic centimeter based on the physiology of mitochondria. So all of that background is to help you make sense of why glyphosate is such a disaster on the planet. Glyphosate was added to our food system in large quantities starting about 1976. But even then, even into the 1980s, we couldn't dream of what was about to happen in the 1990s, which was we were going to be able to genetically modify our crops so that they could be sprayed directly with this herbicide. Before genetic modification, if you sprayed a crop, wheat, corn, soybeans, with glyphosate, the plant would die immediately. And so glyphosate is the number one herbicide used globally. It was originally patented and popularized in the industry by Monsanto in the 1970s into the 1990s. By 2006 or so, it came off patent, and then every chemical company started using it as an ingredient in weed killers of every type. And so today it's in some 90+% of weed killers used worldwide. And so currently we're pouring 2 billion kilograms, 4 billion pounds a year of this single chemical into our food and water system. And unfortunately, it's a water-soluble toxin, which means that it can be carried in the rainwater as it comes off a farm, fills the stream, from the stream goes into the ocean. In the process, it evaporates. And so currently, you can go to any agricultural environment in the world, which is most of the farmable land in the world, and you'll find 85% of the rainfall testing positive for glyphosate. It's in nearly 100% of our rivers at detectable levels. It's in our oceans. It's now even found in pretty high concentrations in our fossil aquifers that are deep underground. And so we've really fully saturated this planet with this chemical. And the reason that's important is because it functions as an antibiotic, and it's been patented as an antibiotic and antifungal. It kills single-celled organisms. And that's a disaster for soil ecology because without the microbes of the soil, you lose fertility of the soil quickly, and now you have the whole farm on an ICU type condition where you're having to do intravenous injections of inputs to try to get a crop to grow with chemical fertilizers and chemical inputs. And then when the plants grow, they have a deficient immune system because they haven't been in touch with the microbiome, and so they're very prone to pests and invasive weeds. And so now you're on herbicides and pesticides, and so you're chemical from stem to stern on the soil system. Well, it turns out that in the human body, over the last 20 years, we've discovered is an organic soil system. And my gut is the most complex soil system that the world has ever created. The human colon actually has more biodiversity per cubic centimeter than any other ecosystem on the planet, rainforests, coral reefs, or any other colon of any other animal, which is interesting. So you look at a chicken or a dog, other mammals, our colon is uniquely anatomically developed, capacity for even more ecosystem diversity than any other colon. And it's for that biodiversity that we end up getting something that looks like intelligence. Intelligence is basically how much data can you get pushed through a single central processing unit. And you can see this with an AI system or the CPU chip in your cell phone or whatever. These computers that are running around us are basically how much data can you process in a short amount of time, and that creates intelligence in your computer. We're the same thing. The brain is only intelligent for the amount of data that it's inputting and processing. And so we are the highest intelligence of organic material born out of this earth, at this point because of the amount of data that we have at our access point. And if you start eating and drinking Roundup or glyphosate, you end up diminishing the amount of information available to that brain. And so you start decreasing the amount of creativity, the amount of stability of the neural processings. You end up with epidemics of mood disorders, depression, anxiety disorders, sleep disorders, sex dysfunction, go on down the list of the neurologic conditions. And then you get into the degenerative conditions, MS, ALS, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and then in children, attention deficit disorders, hyperactivity disorders, autism disorder. So this whole spectrum has accelerated as we've decreased the amount of light energy available to the human mind and the amount of information put into that mind. And so by eating and drinking antibiotics that are killing our soil, we're killing the number of mitochondria per cubic centimeter in the human cell. And so literally since the 1970s, we've been steadily dimming the lights on biology on the planet. And for that, we see deep environmental instability, ecologic collapse, and of course, by the 1990s, deep collapse of human biology. And so chronic disease epidemics really started in the 1990s as we went to genetic modification of our crops to be able to handle 10x, 100x, 1000x more herbicides on them. So glyphosate became so ubiquitous in our water systems between 1996 and 2006 that it just led the charge on not just cancer. It was, really started with obesity in the 1980s. That's the first symptom of a declining metabolism or decrease in mitochondria per human cell. So you get obesity. With obesity, then what obesity is the condition where you can't get the light energy out of the molecules because the mitochondria aren't there. And so you're pushing calories into the cell. There's not enough processing, so it pushes that back out of the cell, and you end up storing that as fat in the liver, which is kind of the warehouse for moving nutrients into the body. Once the liver is full of fat, it starts storing fat in the visceral adiposity inside your belly, and then from there into the peripheral fat of your limbs. And so that started in the 1980s at the population level, not just the United States, but globally. And then as you start to store fat viscerally, you get deep insulin resistance. And so your ability to get calories inside the cell is decreased again. And we end up with prediabetes as an epidemic by 1992. Type 2 diabetes by the late 1990s is going wild in all of our rural and urban populations. And over that time, with the declining energy in the immune system, you end up with autoimmune disease. So we end up with, celiac disease, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis is part of your history that I think you've shared. And as you see these conditions start to go epidemic, you're starting to do a population study of how biology happens at a lower light level. And so autoimmune disease is the process of losing track of self, this lack of self. And that's due to this breaking of the Velcro between the gut cells. And so you get a leaky sieve or a leaky gut. And with leaky gut, you get leaky vasculature. With leaky vasculature, you get leaky brain, you get leaky kidneys. And so the whole system is starting to fail in its boundaries that define a human biology. And for that, the immune system just starts to have to react to everything. And so now you're just churning this battlefield kind of environment where everything seems like a threat. And so your body has to mount a response to breathing and drinking water and food. And so now it feels like life itself is your threat, and you understandably lose confidence in your own body. And I think that's where we start to see really deep disease after autoimmunity. That's when you get into these neurologic conditions, chronic pain syndromes, chronic regional pain syndromes, chronic fatigue syndromes, fibromyalgia, all of these coming out in late 1990s. Now it's just most common stuff is these strange, neuropathic, neurologic diseases that are out there in epidemic form now. By the 2000s, the light energy is getting low enough with glyphosate, starting to permeate everything. By 2006, you've got 96% of corn grown in the United States and elsewhere is genetically modified to handle Roundup directly and glyphosate. We are 85% of soybeans by 2006. So the amount of this toxicity started to be shipped everywhere. And so I recently got a reactive arthritis when I was in India eating dal, which is like my favorite food on the planet is lentils. And now I can't eat lentils at all because I get this reactive arthritis. And it turns out that what I was really eating was really high amounts of glyphosate because India can't produce or has stopped producing its own lentils and is shipping those in from Canada. And Canada has a very short growing season, so it's spraying all of its lentils directly with Roundup or glyphosate herbicide to function as a desiccant or drying agent, so it can be harvested quicker at the end of a short growing season. And so these lentils are carrying high amounts of glyphosate, and it's true for chickpeas and that go into the hummus. It's true for legumes of almost every variety, soybeans, anything that has to be dry before it's harvested. And wheat was really the first one to do this. In 1992, we started spraying wheat directly with glyphosate before it would be harvested. And so we ended up with these really high residues of these chemicals in our wheat in 1992, 93. And by that time, we start to see this rise of celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease to one of the molecules that can break down products of gluten. We didn't have gluten sensitivity. We have glyphosate poisoning, but we kept hiding it as like, oh, it's this gluten is your enemy. And we've been eating bread since the beginning of time. Like it's been a staple in every culture since the beginning of time. And it has never caused disease. And so it's really this beginning of glyphosate poisoning within the wheat that created this whole multi-billion-dollar industry now of gluten-free foods. And it's a sad distraction because ultimately we should have just asked, like, what happened to the bread between 1990 and 1992? Like something changed because now none of us can eat it. And I would send patients over to France and they'd be able to eat a croissant. And they're like, oh my gosh, my gluten sensitivity is gone. And then they'd go back to the United States and they'd eat a single piece of bread and it'd take them a week to recover from the brain fog and the headaches and the poor sleep quality and everything else. And so it was so obvious back then, 2010, that we were leading the charge. Now, fast forward, most of Europe is steeped in glyphosate and there's no country that's devoid of this problem now. And so we've developed chemical sensitivities that we're blaming on the food that we're spraying with the chemicals. And so this is how people are on these elimination diets now, thinking that every food is their problem. I was just out to dinner last night and this woman just held up her cell phone with this list of food sensitivities because it takes too long to list them, And so that's what we're experiencing now is the food has become so separate from nature because it's growing in dirt that has no contact with microbiome intelligence. It's grown in chemicals that are breaking our relationship to our own light energy. And so we're just dimming the life force within the whole planetary human complex. So there's your dismal story. I told you that it is good news. And so the good news is humanity never changes direction unless we've, hit crisis. And so my great excitement is that if we are going to survive as humans, we're going to have to give up this abandonment disorder with nature. And we're going to have to realize that nature is here to nurture the heck out of us and to heal anything that's ever been injured. And in that path, in 2012 in our laboratories in my clinic, we started to uncover fossil soil medicine within our deep soils that nature had been devising from the microbiome 60 million years ago. And what we were able to show is that when you take these families of molecules and put them back in the human experience, it basically functions as a communication network or the wireless communication between human cells. And when human cells have access to information, they immediately start healing. And so what we got to witness was nature had put in her fossil soils 60 million years ago the antidote to a chemical that we would pour into our soils today to create this loss of communication, this loss of connectivity. And so it's just a deep story of grace, ultimately, is that nature really has never allowed an injury to occur that she didn't already have a solution to. And the solution that lies within her fossil soils is showing us a path forward through this eye of the needle of biologic collapse. Is before we go completely dim, before we go extinct, we could become willing to receive from nature again. And we could start to understand that nature had developed systems that allowed us to sit in gardens with almost no effort and watch nature explode around us. And a single woman could feed two or three generations of her children and grandchildren out of a 10 by 10 plot. And she would have such abundance that she'd be sharing it with her neighbors as well. And her neighbors would be sharing with her. And I learned that, from the Hmong people, is like abundance is only, 10 feet away from every family. And so a lot of what we're doing now is traveling around the world to some of the most vulnerable populations on the planet and starting this program, this 10-tree program, started about a year and a half ago in my nonprofits, and we're working with local nonprofits in these spaces of rural Africa and these highly, displaced, vulnerable populations of peoples. And the 10-tree program teaches them how to make soil in one weekend of education or experiential learning, better said. So they go through the experience of building soil. And once they can make their own soil, then they can start to plant these trees. And they pick from 1,200 indigenous species of food-producing plants. And within months, they're watching these trees grow up around them in these little dirt yards that were sterile without anything growing in them because they were so raked free of any biology a few months ago. And now these women are immediately shifting their whole relationship to nature, and they're leaning in hard, and they're changing. Before a piece of fruit or vegetable is ever collected, they're changing their relationship to nature, seeing nature as part of the mothering that's happening in these households. And those plants are going to mother 7 or 10 generations forward, such that nobody can go hungry in these townships now that currently have no food security whatsoever. In 3 years, there's going to be so much food growing out of these yards that it's going to be impossible that the next 7 generations have a food deficiency. They can have war and economic problems, but they will not have food deficiency. And so that's helping mothers understanding that the great fear that they have for their own children, the great insecurity they have as women, goes away completely when they realize they have a whole planet that's here to mother their children into abundance and mother their species into safety. And I think when we really surrender the belief that the masculine is here to protect, I really believe deeply that it's the feminine here that's here to protect. And when we turn that protection over to the feminine, it will nurture us into a state of safety. Whereas the masculine not being equipped on understanding nurture or true safety, the only option we have is war. And so if we keep turning it over to the masculine to protect us in this dangerous world, we will continue to perpetuate war. If we turn it over to Mother and we realize the planet Earth has been mothering life into its existence since the beginning of time, and then mothers, on the human level can align with that energy and become co-creative. Sitting in the middle of a garden, she can be part of that co-creative abundance. And we're watching men and women find this feminine within themselves. And we're watching whole generations of kids now that are deciding to leave the cities and go out into the country and start farming for the first time. And this has been a great joy of Farmer's Footprint, is realizing like every household is starting to get interested. Every household is ready to be part of this revolution. Every household can dig up, 10 by 10 plot of grass and start planting a food forest. And in that, they're going to reconnect to this abundance model that doesn't change just what's on your plate. It changes your whole relationship to the nature we were born within. And so I just honor your journey. And I would love for you to reflect on your journey a little bit for your audience here. In the context of what we just heard, you've lived a lot of this. And you've found your way back in to nature, and you've been nurtured back to health. And you're doing something amazing for all of us, which is you're walking this path back into a nature that loves you. And for that, we see this woman who's inspiring tens of thousands of people around you. And that's what I keep seeing, is when an individual chooses to step back into nature, the ripple effects are immediate and powerful.
Thank you. When I was at the HEAL conference at Gaia in Colorado a few months ago, I took with me a jar of Wise Earth adaptogenic honey that I'd been using for an autoimmune trigger, and I left it on the snack table for people to try. On the second day, there was a group of producers and tech people standing around the table looking in awe about something, so I went over. Turns out they'd tried the honey. One of them said, "What the hell is in this stuff? I feel awake and alive for the first time in ages, and I only just took a half spoon 5 minutes ago." Then Kelly Noonan-Gores of the HEAL documentary, who was hosting the event, was like, "Give me some, I need a pick-me-up." This was at the end of a very long, amazing, but draining weekend. She took a half spoon and instantly felt revitalized for the rest of the day. Within minutes, all the incredible speakers, Gaia directors, engineers, everyone was taking this honey, and it was like the energy in the room up-leveled in a way I've never seen. I'm telling you the story exactly as it happened, which is why I'm bringing you this here on Reconditioned. Wise Earth adaptogenic honey was created in response to founder Daniel losing his sister to cancer. It uses traditional Chinese medicine and cutting-edge extraction technology to create a potent adaptogenic honey designed to combat the current leading health issue, chronic inflammation, which is how everything starts. It's helped people from all over the world combat challenges from lack of energy to digestive issues to hormonal imbalances and a range of chronic illnesses. It uses the absolute best quality honey as a carrier of adaptogens such as reishi, chaga, and cordyceps to enhance both bioavailability and taste, ensuring maximum potency and effectiveness. Mix it into your coffee, whack it in your smoothie, or just take it neat on a spoon. You only need a little bit a day for the effects to work. And as I've seen from those around me and my own experience, those effects are huge. So visit wiseearth.uk, that's WYSE, earth.uk for UK or .com for US, and use code Lauren10 for a 10% discount. I have to take a moment for your reverence for women and for the feminine. Because it's really beautiful to hear. And I agree. I mean, I think about 85% of my listeners are women. The majority are mothers who this is what I see with mothers. They have this deep connection to intuition, which has been deeply wounded over the last few generations. And women are starting to come back to realizing that this doesn't feel right. Maybe I'm not going to put this thing into my child that I'm being told I should. Maybe I'm going to birth my baby at home, even though everyone around me is telling me it's the most dangerous thing I can do. And so, I see so many women who are, in touch with me and in my programs telling me, I don't know what happened, but something happened that just woke up my intuition in how I need to mother and how I need to raise these children. I'm seeing, so many of my friends are now homeschooling, and I'm really fortunate, to have a group of women around me who we all raise our children very holistically. And I'm just seeing more and more of it, and hearing you kind of speak about this from, the perspective of the mother archetype, but also mother planet. And it's all one. And it's our disconnection from that when I speak to women or see women who, are disconnected from that and are disconnected from the needs of their children and the needs of their family. And you see the sickness, and it's just perpetuating. And that's difficult to witness, but I think it's also part of our journey. I think there are, people that have to go down that route, and, but just hearing you speak kind of with this reverence for women, it's just so beautiful to hear. And I agree, women are the protectors. Women in my, from my experience, my mum was the one that said, I'm not putting these steroids into my 2-year-old. And so we're going to go and we're going to do something else. And, my working class parents, and she went to the library and, just researched and was like, we're going to do homeopathy and we're going to give this thing a go. And she never put those steroids into me. Left school at 15, had no education on any of this. And her intuition, her connection to her intuition without ever questioning it as well. It's just very like, this doesn't feel right. And that's that. My mum's quite straight, and there was no kind of, I don't know, she didn't really question it too much. She was like, this is what I'm going to do. And the doctors were telling her she was a bad mother and that I was going to have deformities and, all the stuff that happened to the other kids who were on the steroids, by the way. Yeah. But I learned that from my own mother, that deep connection to intuition. And when that is wounded, there is a complete separation. And that's when we start seeing illness and disease. And I'm seeing that so much. So that was just my thanks to you, how you speak about that.
Well, you hit on something so important. Again, I think I just brushed by it in that initial monologue of that patient that was about to swallow that chemotherapy. I spent all that time breaking her intuition, her connection to intuition. And that was a dark feeling in me. And it took me years to figure out what I was feeling, because it was just like I felt a weight in my gut.
When you were talking about it, that it's like you're carrying that.
Deep apology for that. Like I did that to many patients because that's what I was trained to do, is to disconnect them from their intuition so that they would take the drug. And so I really believed that these drugs were their only path for decades. I believe this. And so I meant well, I suppose. But because I wasn't tied to my intuition, it was impossible for me to show them the path towards that. And so I think that is an interesting thing for all of us to just steep in right now, is when we pull back from nature, our creativity gets disconnected from intuition. And it's that simple. And if we reconnect to nature, our creativity gets rooted back into intuition, and we immediately know our path. Your mother never questioned it. And so that's what I saw in those midwives that I had practiced with, is those women never questioned that women are capable of giving birth. And I watched, miracles happen. And of course, there's, some outcomes that aren't ideal because we're a sick population and, all this, but it was tiny fractions of births were having problems. Contrast that to my first birth in a hospital in the United States in my third year of medical school. I made OBGYN my very first clinical rotation because I was so confident, and I was like, had more experience than any third year medical school student had. So I was like, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to be so good at this. And my pager went off on the first evening, and I was so excited. I went sprinting down to the ER so I could beat the residents there. And I was just going to be like first man on scene. And I crashed through the ER doors, and this woman is actively coding. Her heart had stopped a few seconds ago, and they were shocking her heart back into rhythm, giving her epinephrine and all these drugs because she had just overdosed on cocaine. And she was, 26 weeks pregnant. And so seconds later, the residents are crashing through. 2 minutes later, the fetal maternal fellows, the specialists in high-risk pregnancy, were crashing through the doors, and they did a quick assessment. The baby's heartbeat was still happening, and so they literally pushed her into the nearest OR 1 minute down the hall, and it was 30 seconds from skin to baby, right through her abdomen, right through the wall of her uterus, and that baby was out of her belly in a minute from a crash C-section. And this baby was pulled out in the world as the woman's heart stopped again, and they couldn't resuscitate her. So mother dies on the table, and this infant is born and immediately put into an ICU. And at 26 weeks can hardly breathe, and it's on the edge, and then spends the next 4 days in agony going through cocaine withdrawal, and then dies a week into agony. And that was my first birth in the United States. And you just can't see a more horrific example of a species in complete disconnect from nature. And this is how it manifests. This is what it looks like. And so right now in the United States, we have the number one neonatal death of any developed country in the world. And so your chance of dying as a newborn is worse in the United States than any place else on earth. So we are literally showing the world what this extinction event is going to look like. If you keep going down the avenue of chemical food systems, chemical disconnect from nature, chemical reliance on drug management of disease, this is what it's going to look like, worse and worse every day. And those children by age 2 will have cancer, and those children by age 2 will have neurologic disorders. And so there's just so much downward pressure on biology right now. And in contrast, you can go to rural Peru, and the community is still living exactly like it has for 40,000 years. They are regeneratively farming just as they have had for tens of thousands of years. They have food forests that keep anybody from being hungry in the area. And so there's these pockets of humanity that are still living a remembered state. And there's, thank God, a few pockets that have been spared this colonial brainwashing of education. And they still are learning, and they're still knowing what it feels like to be human. And so we have this moment of extinction that's underway now that I think is the extinction of our inhumanity, I hope. And for that, we could refine our humanity and start to trust nature within us again.
We're finding those pockets of people everywhere though now, and that's kind of what's keeping me going. And I think maybe, COVID was a big catalyst for that. For me, obviously, it happened a long time before that, and people thought I was crazy for a long time talking about, all these things. And now all of a sudden you're finding just people that you never thought would ever question these systems, questioning it. So, yes, with farming, it needs to be, where we've got farmland. But even in kind of London, I'm finding more and more people waking up to this information and wanting to reconnect and wanting to do this sort of work. And that's amazing. And I think that is going to help us, one by one, just get better. You talk about the antidote to, what we've done with glyphosate. Your lab, you're very modest, but your lab kind of found the antidote.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was John Gilday's wisdom that happened. So John's in my lab was one of our lead scientists, and he had helped me back at the University of Virginia. He's a brilliant cell biologist out of Johns Hopkins, and he had helped me with my cancer research when I was developing chemotherapy. And I don't know, I think we just have some sort of old, ancient soul contract if those things are real. Because, I don't know. I can't tell you how miraculous when you're a scientist and you suddenly see something that nobody's seen before. And that's what happened with my chemotherapy. Like, he had developed a very, very complicated and extraordinary technique for microscopy where we could see things happening inside of cells at this extreme detail of a single protein and its function. And I was able to show through his microscopy that this vitamin A compound was doing things to cancer cells that just had never been seen before. And fast forward 5 years when I carried a bottle of dirt water into his lab, I'm like, I think we just found something that's way better than the vitamin A. I think it's dirt. And he was just like, you're crazy, dude. I just spent $50,000 putting filters into my laboratory to get the dirt out of the municipal water that was killing my cells. And I said, just try this. Just put this on, the same cells that we were testing my chemotherapy on. And it would be a couple months before he took the time to do that. And he actually got sick. He got the flu and was in bed with a very high fever for a few days. And he's one of these guys that's just so brilliant and driven in his career that he's out of microscope much of 7 days a week. And then suddenly he was stuck in bed. And the only thing he'd reached was this 90-page white paper I had handed him from one of my colleagues on soil science, and had told him that we have pulled it out of this soil science paper, a theory on these carbon molecules made by bacteria and fungi in soils, and I want you to look at those and see what it does to cancer cells. In a fevered state, he basically, I can only explain it as like some sort of theta wave meditation that was in this fevered state. He figured out in his mind, without a single experiment, that we had uncovered nature's solution to glyphosate in a single weekend. He had done all the thought experiments. He'd played it all out in his head. He had the whole thing. Called me Monday. He's so excited. He was just like beside himself. I was like, this is what I think you've got here in this thing. And this is what, and I didn't even understand a lot of the words he was saying because he was so down the path further than I was. And it would take us about 2 years to prove out everything that he had figured out in his head that weekend. And so I feel like that's what nature does, is when you start to remember something, it is so thorough and so immediate and is so known that it doesn't take a scientist to go and actually prove it. It's just simply true. And science doesn't create truth. Science at its best starts to get a revelation on the truth. Truth can be revealed to a scientist, but it doesn't come from the scientist. And so I want everybody to just think about that when you hear people saying, trust the science. Science is not a body of knowledge. Science is not a body of truth. Science is a process of witnessing truth. And we're so bad at doing it because we go in with such bizarre premises of nature is against us that we often misinterpret what we're seeing in front of us as scientists because we believe that nature is against us, because we believe that human life only happens if you sterilize the environment around it so that nothing else is competing for the power of life. And so it's this belief that humans can exist or have to exist in a vacuum that drives science. It's why we do petri dish science. We grow a single cell in isolation and then we decide we've figured out disease. No biology has ever functioned in an isolated state. Life only happens in an interconnected state of diversity. And so the very premise of science itself is flawed in that we keep testing things in petri dishes thinking we just showed something of nature, which all we did was really affirm the brokenness of our isolation from nature. So all of that said, I just want that to be the background because there's this tendency for people to think that I'm intelligent, and I'm telling you, like, I was a C, B+ student for most of my life. I'm not a good student. I'm not a smart person. I'm a human. And for that, I have so much information at my fingertips if I sit still and listen. And so all of you have this genius within you that is waiting to just like express itself through you. And that genius is not coming from your human brain. It's coming as the result of a brain that's connected to a biodiverse gut. And in that gut, you have 40,000 species that are speaking its truth into you. And so intuition is ultimately plays out in the gut. That's why you feel your intuition in your gut. That's why you feel your truth in your gut. It's because your truth is not coming from the human brain. Your truth is coming from nature within you. And nature is inherently a complex, interconnected, intelligent ecosystem. And so I wanted you all to hear that story of John because he found something in himself. He found intelligence within himself that revealed something of nature. And now it's been 15 years of watching that knowledge that he found and remembered playing out in hundreds of thousands of families worldwide. So we put those fossil soils into supplements in 2012, 2013, and went after gluten sensitivity. We peer-reviewed, published our data showing that these molecules from fossil soil could reverse gluten sensitivity at the gut lining and, really function as kind of this antidote to this chemical poisoning and everything else. And so watching nature combat the biggest mistakes we would ever make as humans actually caught no traction in the gluten sensitive population. It certainly did at the individual level, but as an industry, they shut us down. They actually kicked us out of the gluten sensitive conferences and all this because we were showing that nature had a solution. And every other booth in those facilities that were paying for these conferences to happen were some sort of gluten-free pasta or gluten-free bread. It was already a $40 billion industry by that time. And so to find out that just as the pharmaceutical companies really weren't after a healing of cancer, to find out that the science of gluten sensitivity doesn't want to hear that this is actually glyphosate and not gluten as the problem. It goes to just show that this is not like the chemical companies against us. This is human nature playing out an abandonment disorder where we believe that nature is against us, and we are looking constantly for stories to reaffirm the belief that we were kicked out of nature and that nature is against us and gluten's attacking us. And for God's sakes, don't eat lentils because there's lectins in there. Well, it's not the lectins; it's the glyphosate that was poured on those things. It's just this constant demonizing of nature that we are doing, and for that we believe that there's a virus attacking the world, or we believe, that cancer is attacking a human body. When in fact, these are just human bodies that are demonstrating what the dimming of light looks like. And all we have to do is reconnect to light. And it's really that stupidly simple in the end. Is like, wow, if we would just care for the earth beneath our feet enough to receive from it, we will in a single season rebuild food systems that are so nourishing, so nutrient dense, that our mitochondria will begin to proliferate immediately in our bodies. And we will do in what took you a decade or so to do in your body, we could do overnight as a species if we collaborate with nature together. You had to find your own path, like threading the needle, finding your own nutrition path towards wholeness, because nobody was there to help change the food system. Nobody was there to help, test your food and show you what was glyphosate heavy, what was not. You had to basically use your own body as a laboratory, which is the only laboratory that's never going to lie to you. But this experience is like, wow, if we all just put our trust back in nature, and we all in our different roles as a doctor, as a farmer, as a mother, as a banker, and we start to say, like, how do we bring our industry alongside of natural systems? How do we solve for the price and the problem of a farmer trying to make the transition to regenerative food system? How do we help solve their pain points with our banking system? How do we help solve that as government regulatory systems? We can all be a part of that journey into this wholeness. And I want everybody to hear that, because the longer we demonize, a chemical company or a pharmaceutical industry or oil and gas industry or carbon as a concept or viruses as a concept, the more we demonize something outside of ourselves to justify the insecurity we feel inside, the further we kick the can down the road towards real solutions. And so we all have to become part of this journey into a co-creative relationship with nature again. And so there's no demon here. There's nobody against us. There's nobody out to kill us. There is an insidious process of self-destruction from our own belief that we were kicked out of nature. And that plays out in all kinds of dark ways. But it really just is dimness. It can be reversed so quickly, and we can brighten our experience as humans. And in that brightening, we can find what it feels like to be connected to an ecosystem and supported by that ecosystem. And that connectivity at the microscopic level leads to a macro reconnectivity of societies and cultures and communities. And we will rebirth culture. There's a reason why the only industry on the world that includes the word culture is agriculture. We have information technology, we have transportation industries, we got oil and gas industries, energy sector, but we only have one agriculture. And so when we find our way back to our human expression, it's going to look a lot like women kneeling in the middle of their garden and reteaching everybody there. And it's been really fun for me to watch a generation of men and women finding that call within themselves. And about 55% of the regenerative farms in North America now are led by a woman. And globally, that percentage is probably even higher. In Africa, where we're working, it's 95% women, leading the charge on this agricultural, restoration and remembrance. So I have a lot of hope in that the women are going to show us what protection looks like through nurture. And when we begin to be nurtured by the feminine archetype within all of us, we're going to learn how to receive again. And it only takes one season of stop plowing, let the microbiome recover, don't spray the chemicals in the spring, and let biodiversity start to return. One season, and that soil jumps back to a vitality that hadn't been seen in 50 years. And so if it only takes a season to reverse 50 years of damage in a farm field, how reassuring is that for the patient who's coming in with a life-threatening condition? That just for one season, reconnect yourself to nourishment and reconnect yourself to biodiverse experiences of the air you breathe, the water you touch, the ecosystems you sleep in, breathe in, move in. Go find nature again and let her welcome you back into her womb and rebirth the remembered original design that is you. I can't overemphasize how powerful you are. Like, you literally self-organized in the womb of your mother. From a single cell, you self-organized 70 trillion human cells that would organize themselves into 2 kidneys, 10 toes, 2 lungs, a heart. That self-manifested. That was something that is not, there's no template in the human cell that shows cells where to go. There's no roadmap. You literally are forming a complex system that we call a human body by your alignment with nature. Nature knows that template in the womb of a mother, whether it be a blue whale or a woman. The template is in the energy field. It's outside of the human cells. It's outside of the whale cells. There is a design of life that is in the energetics of this universe. And in the womb of a mother, there is an understood template there. And in that understanding, the cells self-organize into a perfect body. You still have all of that information. If you didn't, you would have lost track of your identity many times ago. And as your body disappears and reappears every millionth of a second, which is how light energy works, it's a particle for a moment and then it's a wave for a moment. And so every millionth of a second, all the particles in your body are disappearing and it reappears without loss of identity. And so there's something outside of not just the cells, there's something outside of the atomic structure of light and particle that knows you. And you keep reorganizing. Every cell, every atom keeps reorganizing in this quantum entanglement of your identity. And you have that. You have to have that or you would have disappeared. And so for all of you, no matter how exhausted you might feel, no matter how diseased your body might feel, no matter how far you are from that intuition and that trust in your own body for the separation that you feel from it, I can only guarantee you that you have the original math right at your fingertips. It's literally within you. And that original design is waiting to be reoriented to. That North Star is inside of you. And so just start to breathe through your disease. Your dis-ease is this forgetting, this universal forgetting of the design within you. And so start to trust your disease. The disease is there to show you not a dead end, but actually the path forward. And if you go into the wound, for you, it was your joints. And I've actually had that journey. It took me a year of this reactive arthritis in my foot to figure out that it was the lentils in India that were poisoning me. And it was through a coincidence that some colleague of mine said, "Hey, do you know that India is importing lentils from Canada?" And I was like, holy, I just assumed, like, doll's been here for 40,000 years. I just assumed it was. And so it just like clicked in my head of like, oh my gosh, I'm eating the highest concentrations of glyphosate on the planet right now. And so it was such an interesting journey into, again, if you go into the wound and keep asking, what is this showing me? You're going to get the answer, and the answer is going to show you immediate route out of that crisis. And so start just breathing gratitude for your discomfort, whether it be chronic fatigue, chronic pain, whatever you're feeling in your body right now. Just practice like breathing gratitude into whatever you're feeling. And for that, start to be more intuitive about what you're feeling, which is much different than what you believe. So not what you believe or think, what are you actually feeling? And if the pain is actually not in the joint, but it's actually deep in your belly, or it's actually in the head or wherever it is, lean into that. Start to ask your original design, what's trying to manifest here? Where did I get disconnected? Where's the pattern? What's the original plan for my body? I just couldn't be more hopeful for a humanity that has now hit the wall in our separation disorder. And for that separation, we've brought ourselves to our knees biologically to this state of infertility. And if we go into the wound right now and we feel it fully, we're going to design a different society. We're going to reconnect to bioregional economic drivers. We're going to decentralize governments. We're going to decentralize currencies. We're going to decentralize technologies. We're going to constantly be looking for the technologies that augment the biologic biodiversity within us and around us. We're no longer going to demonize carbon and viruses. We're going to start to ask the question of where is the carbon supposed to be cycling? How do we support the cycles of it's the grasslands of North Africa. The North Africa is going to go back into a grasslands again. Of course, it does that every 20,000 years. It's ready to do that. We call it the Sahara Desert, but it's the largest grasslands every 20,000 years. And so the planet itself is about to rebirth. And we can go on that ride, and we can see extinction turn into abundance nearly overnight. And we can see that happen on single farm fields. I get to see it at the bedside of a patient. And I'm now really confident I'm going to see it on a planetary level. This Earth is about to rebirth. And every time it does that, it gets more biodiverse, more intelligent, more beautiful. And I want to stay in play. And for that, I keep waking up in the morning and trying to find other people that are remembering why they're here and remembering the original design. And thank goodness there's so many now. And so many women are waking up. So many men are waking up. Whole cultures are starting to reinvigorate. I'm in Africa and India a lot, and I'm in South America recently again. And watching these cultures start to reinvigorate and remember, we need to know our language. We need to reteach our children our indigenous language, because our language was coming out of the nature. We understood nature through our language, and language was expressing the nature within us. And when we all went to start learning English or Spanish or whatever it was, these colonial languages started to separate us from nature. And these cultures really are remembering it, and they're remembering their food and the importance of their food systems. And so there's this awakening starting. And some days I just, give up hope, because it's like, wow, you're looking at the speed of collapse and you're like, well, the speed of waking up is way too slow. There's no way we can do it now. Like, in the science and the thing, it looks impossible. But isn't that like every story we've ever heard? Like, we're at the gates of Mordor and there's no hope, and the chemicals arrayed against us are so massive in scale that it just seems like biology cannot possibly survive. And yet biology sits there and says, it's not this day. We're going to keep going. There may be an extinction someday, but it's not this day, because nature is here and willing to wrap us back up, put her back in the womb, put us back in the womb, and regrow this thing. And so this is the journey we're on. And when we get dim enough that we can no longer do anything, nature will take her first breath again, and she'll pull us into a future. And there will be a few of us that survive that and go on to create a different relationship to her and create a different society.
So much in there. So many questions. I remember listening to a podcast you were on during the whole COVID saga, and it helped me a lot, because you were talking about the real virus was the fear, which I believe in the frequency of the energetic frequency of fear actually causing disease and perpetuating disease. I want to ask you, and this might be a strange question, but I'm going to ask it to you. If, God forbid, you or someone you loved got cancer, what would you do?
Oh, and people I love are getting cancer all the time, Cancer is just so ubiquitous around us, and many of my patients died in my clinic. And so there's not, the opposite of disease is not, how can I say this? Health is not the opposite of disease. I guess that's a way of looking at it. And so the disease is a symptom way downstream of a failure relationship to nature. What I got to see in my patients over time as we reconnected to nature, both myself and them, and the colleagues I had around me. I mean, again, I'm talking about Ayurvedic nutritionists with 9,000 years of science at our fingertips. We had Chinese medicine docs with 5,000 years of science at their fingertips. So I was like the neophyte in this team of like believing in nature and understanding how to be part of it. So this team was, steeping my patients back in it. And some of our patients were going through miraculous healings, which in Western medicine, we call these spontaneous remissions, where suddenly you have a scan and like stage 4 cancer that was all over the body is not only is the tumor's gone, there's no evidence it was actually there. There's no scar tissue. There's no hole in the brain where the tumor had just been. Literally, it all goes back to an original design. And so there's miracles. We can't write miracle in the medical chart because you can't bill for that. And so you have to write spontaneous remission, which has a Medicare code that you can bill for. So amazingly, we can bill for miracles if we code it right. And so in that journey, started to realize that the opposite of cancer is not no cancer. The opposite of cancer is trusting nature again. And I saw many patients die that had regained not only trust in nature, but trust of their own path. And they recognized that their departure was perfect, that their design of their life was perfect, and they achieved everything they needed to. And they were sad for letting go of the finite expression of life. And so, but they were also in a state of near ecstasy in those last few breaths because they know they had done it right. They had done their path and they had reconnected to their intuition, and they got to see their life backwards in time and realize that all the wounds, all of the rejections, all the broken relationships had actually been all perfectly placed, all perfectly designed to bring them into wholeness before they died. And so what you find out the opposite of cancer is lessons learned. And you're graduating. If you will pay attention to the disease, it will teach you the lesson you came here to Earth to learn.
So believe that.
And you will move to your next frequency of vibration. Your next iteration is a split second away. There is no death as an endpoint. Death is an immediate rebirth. And that's what you get to learn in the ICUs. And my third specialty was in hospice palliative care. And so I was admitting 80 patients a week to die. And when you're seeing that amount of death, you start to really understand that this is just a birth canal. And you're being pushed into a newer reality, a different reality that is more bright, more colorful, more real than what we see behind this egoic shield of human eyes. And so you start to just realize that the fear of cancer or the fear of the virus or the fear of the thing, that's the disease, is the fear. And once you embrace the journey and know that this cancer is your body, it's not separate from your body. These are your cells that are showing you loneliness. They're showing you where you have stored the deepest rejections, the deepest wounds, the epigenetic patterns of trauma from the last 40 generations are stored up in that area of your body and now expressing cancer, this deep loneliness. Cancer is the most lonely cell in the body. It has to be isolated from all of its neighbors or else it won't be cancer. And so it's showing you the deepest loneliness within your body. And if in that loneliness you find your way back to nature and you find yourself back to a connected source has held your identity before you were human and will hold your identity after you're human, suddenly the fear goes away and all you can see is perfection and layers of more complex beauty and intelligence stacking and stacking. And so the opposite of cancer is trust in nature. And in that, so many of my patients over time, whether they were healing from their cancer, not healing from their cancer, they always, a year and a half, 2 years in, 4 years in, would say, cancer was the best gift I ever got in my life. It showed me how beautiful I am. It showed me, it reconnected me ultimately to my intuition and to my trust of self. And when you get to be the reflective mirror to that journey, you do stop fearing cancer. And so for myself, if I were to get cancer, the curiosity would almost be out of control of like, oh my gosh, what is this trying to show me? Like, really, that part of my body? That's where all my loneliness was? That's so interesting. I'm so intrigued. And what would I do? It turns out that I had this amazing little weird moment in my life. This was about, I don't know, it was over 10 years ago now. But I was hiking in Canada. I was up in north of Calgary, near Banff, which is an extraordinary part of the Rocky Mountains there. And I was at this high glacial lake, and I had just like gone skinny dipping in this lake, and so I was just in this raw state of like invigoration, like the cold water and the minerals in the lake and the amount of electricity in the lake. Like I was just like wired, and I was walking alone down this path. Coming out of that experience and not really paying attention to anything, kind of spaced out, just in bliss. Suddenly this little tiny tree to my right caught my attention. And it was just like the most unassuming little pine tree that was maybe 2 or 3 feet tall, a little young sapling of a pine tree. And it caught my attention, and it sounded like it was just like talking to me. But it basically said, hey, if you ever get cancer, just come hang out right here with me. Oh. And it was just like such a super, like, it didn't tell me how or why. It was just like, hey, just come out, hang out with me. And so that's always like been in the back of my brain of like, wow, nature's already shown me her antidote, and it's a little tree in the woods, and it just wants me to come hang out. Mm. And so that's what, I will do when I'm diagnosed with some sort of disease, whether it's cancer or otherwise. I'm ready to just go and sit. Which then asks the question, like, why am I going to wait for the disease to go sit with the tree? And so my life right now is that constant question of like, am I living a path that's opposite of cancer? Or am I waiting for the cancer to show me the path forward? And I'm increasingly excited. And I ended up closing my clinic 1.5 years ago for this program that we now do online, which is called The Journey of Intrinsic Health. And it's an 8-week program where we start to walk that path before the cancer comes. Like, let's walk you back into nature. Let's let you sit by the tree now so that the disease within your body goes away before it presents as some sort of fatal condition. And if we remember you far enough back in time, you might just show us the original design of a human before it believed it was separate from nature. And so we just started these immersive retreats, which are kind of our next generation after the 8-week program of what is the environment that we can put people in that's so steeped in every single breath being retrained, every single spot of water being retrained into your body, every interaction of carbon and water and the dance in your body, of the microbiome. Can we put you into an environment for just 7 days in which you are fully reconnected to the original design? And this original design, again, goes back to like the beginning of time somehow. And so can we just dial back so we can leap forward over the amount of genetic trauma that was stored in our bodies, because it's too much now. We don't have the ability to procreate because we have too much stored trauma. And so we have to leap over our genetics to our energetic imprint and redesign the genetics to our original energetic design, which might be called a soul or, some sort of energy field. And so how do we do that? Through breath, through meditations, through shared meals is a big one. There's something about fellowship around food that is really key to our future. And if we start to do that, if we just start to have dinner parties again every night where we are just hoping that somebody we haven't met comes over for dinner so that we can hear a different perspective on the human journey. Like this is a deep part of it. And so if any of you maybe want to start the journey, start community again, start using food as a focus of fellowship. And these women sitting in their gardens in these, Hmong refugee camps in Colorado, like that's how simple it is to begin again. We are all refugees of this war against nature now. And we're all sitting in some form of a refugee camp, which might be called a city, it might be called a rural farm. But these are all refugee camps from nature right now. And we need to stop escaping nature into refuge, and we need to reconnect. And for that, we're going to find deep fellowship. And the food is designed to bring us together to realize these things.
I feel that myself. I mean, I was raised in kind of a Middle Eastern, Mediterranean culture. And, my grandmother had like 30 grandchildren, would cook for. My best memories, my most healing memories of my life, I think, were being in these, small apartments, and, with my grandmother cooking and everyone around, like the whole family sharing food. There's so much healing in that. So that really resonated when you said that. Obviously, a big topic that comes up a lot, and you were touching on kind of children's neurological challenges, is this pervasive issue of autism, ADHD, the consistent labeling of children, and it's getting worse and it's getting worse. And I know that, ION, which is this thing you're very modest about that you discovered in your lab and that John discovered, is helping children on a huge scale. Can you talk just a little bit about how it's doing that? Because I know it's helped kind of thousands and thousands of families kind of get their children back.
Yeah. Yeah, when the gluten sensitivity kind of community was resistant to this information, I kind of went back to the drawing board of like, how are we going to get this product out to the world? Like, we were watching it do miracles in our own bodies and my patients, everything else. And it ended up being the mothers of autistic children that ended up being our path into it. It turns out that, 2010, 12, this time frame, lots of data was coming out of Japan and other places that was suggesting that autism was rooted somehow in this loss of biodiversity of the gut. And so mothers of autistic children getting absolutely no help from the allopathic world and to understanding why this epidemic was happening. To this day, the allopathic world is in denial that we even have an autism problem.
It's like it's normal.
It's like, well, we just didn't diagnose it back in the 1970s. Yeah. It's always been here, blah, blah, blah. In the 1970s, we were diagnosing 1 in 5,000 children with autism. Today, we're diagnosing 1 in 5, 1 in 10, 1 in 30. Well, let me put it this way. There's a great possibility that Western medicine could have missed the condition, but there is no way a mother in 1975 didn't know their child was autistic. Mm-hmm. There's no way the mothers were not noticing that their children were nonverbal, hitting their heads on the wall 6 hours a day, total sensory processing deficits. This wasn't missed. Like this just didn't exist when I was a kid. And so what happened between 1996 and 2006 is this condition went epidemic. Was this increasing science that paralleled the science of the microbiome and the importance of gut health, and mothers found that information. And so when we came in with a product made from soil science, made from the microbiome of fossil soils, it made immediate sense to these mothers. Their intuition turned on. And it was so interesting to see the contrast between my chemotherapy and trying to induce fear in women to take my chemotherapy versus offer nature, and the intuition immediately picked up on how that was going to work, why it was going to work. And it was that trust in nature that really made this thing so successful so quickly, because they didn't have to believe me. They could feel the truth in it. And so I don't think they did trust me as a scientist. There was no reason for them to, really. They had been so abused by the scientific community, really, as medical community at large, because moms are often blamed for their children's disease. Like, it's probably something that happened in utero. It's blah, blah, blah. It's like, and so there's this huge guilt trip put on mothers, and they're given really no help to find the deeper truths there. So finding nature and offering nature, mothers will key into that very quickly, and they started changing it. And the way in which nature heals is exponential. It's not linear. The way in which drugs work is that you try to decrease inflammation enough to try to allow the natural healing process start to catch up with the rate of injury. And so we're all walking around with a rate of injury and a rate of repair. And if the rate of repair is faster than the rate of injury, we never get a disease. So drugs are trying to slightly modify your rate of injury versus rate of repair, trying to help you towards this long struggle back to health. And so any pharmaceutical model for health is this slow journey back to kind of repair. And you hope that the repair is outpacing the injury that the drug is causing. Steroids are a good example of this. Steroids do so much injury that if you haven't really fixed the problem in 5 days, the steroid's now going to be your problem, not your solution. But you're now stuck on the steroid because your symptoms were put into under a wet blanket, and therefore the fire went out. As soon as you try to peel the wet blanket on, the fire starts again because you didn't address the fuel underneath the fire. So these mothers, as they started to see this, immediately started peeling off other things, realizing like, if I just start here at the gut, I'm going to begin a journey for my children. But it was not 3 years, 30-year journeys. It was 3 days, 5 days. These children were showing us something that, previous to that moment, I didn't think was possible. And what they were showing is that their brains weren't damaged, actually. They were nonverbal because of the cacophony, the chaos within the information stream coming from their gut that had been so damaged and in disrepair from the ecosystem was so damaged that they weren't getting the right information or enough information into the brain to make sense of. As soon as this stuff goes back in, it's basically like compost on a garden. It's so nutrient dense, and it's got all of the information. The way in which these carbon molecules work is the same way in which mycelium work in soil systems. So the mycelium are pushing information like a fiber optic neural system through the soil by this process called redox chemistry. And so electricity is flowing through soil just like electricity flows through a computer chip. That liquid circuit board in nature is done through these carbon molecules. So when we put these carbon molecules from fossil soil back into the human system, you're basically turning on the wireless network. And suddenly one cell can talk to another cell, just like when your wireless cell phone tower goes out, your cell phone can't connect to anybody. You start to develop slowness to the computer. Your battery goes dead quickly because it's looking for signal, all these things. That same thing is happening in every single human cell. The cell phone is now not connected because the wireless communication towers are down. So these carbon molecules that we found in fossil soils are the wireless network of nature. And so as we started putting that back into human systems, we couldn't even believe what was happening because we had never been shown, as scientists that study everything in isolation in a petri dish, we had never witnessed healing or spontaneous remission happening under a microscope before. And we got to start to see that under the microscope almost immediately. And then our autistic children were showing us what that would look like clinically, is that they would go from nonverbal to verbal in a week. And it wasn't learning. These are 5-year-old, 7-year-old, 10-year-old children who had never spoken before, had never said a word. And they never needed to learn how to speak. Instead, a week in, they wake up in the morning, come out and say, "Mom, I'm hungry." Mom falls over, bawling. Afraid she would never hear her child speak. And not only did they speak, it was a perfect sentence, knew how to phonate, know how to make words. Like, I still don't understand that because it's a complex thing to know a word, even what the word means, and then know how to shape your tongue so it would say that word. And these children don't have an accent. They just speak it. And so what they was showing us is that intelligence isn't coming from the human brain, and a failure of intelligent behavior isn't coming from some neurologic dysfunction. It's coming from just a lack of information. And if you get information systems back up and running, the wireless towers start turning on, all of the intelligence is there because nature is speaking through the child. The child doesn't have to learn how to be intelligent. The child is intelligent because it's a connected nature again. And so that has changed my whole perspective on health. Health isn't something, again, health isn't the opposite of disease, which we're tempted to believe. And if you believe that, then drugs make sense. When you realize that disease is not the opposite of health, disease is a downstream disconnect from nature that is a staggering system of failures, then just trying to reverse the disease is not enough. It doesn't actually do anything. You might back up 6 months or a year, but you don't back up 20 years earlier before the disease existed. Whereas if you put nature's connections back together, you put the wireless connectivity back, then the original design expresses itself. And so now this, the supplements are now kind of foundation for just human health in general. And it's become such an interesting contrast because around the time that we were making these discoveries around soil science came the biohacking movement. And so my colleagues, Dave Asprey maybe being the most famous of them, but Dave Asprey and colleagues come along with this technologic promise of like, oh my gosh, we're going to find all these technologies that are going to biohack, that are going to hack biology, and we're going to be smarter than biology. And we're going to find like red LED lights that improve human biology.
We're not hacking anything. We don't need to hack our biology.
I mean, it's such a ridiculous premise when you just remember the definition of life. Yeah. Life is 1,000 times brighter than the sun at a single bacterium, 10,000 times brighter at a human cell. So show me the chip or the peptide or the infusion that's 10,000 times brighter than the sun, the Oura ring. These technologies are so low in their vibration and their frequencies and their light density compared to you. There is no way you're going to find a technology out there that is human-made that is actually going to compete with the intelligence within you. And so that's where this journey of intrinsic health came from. And its confidence is like, we have to unleash what's inside of ourselves. We need to stop looking for some technologic promise outside of our bodies. And we need to realize we're the highest technology on the land by logarithms. Like there's no computer that even comes close to a human cell's capacity for intelligence, for the amount of information a human cell can process. We basically have 70 trillion quantum computers running inside of our bodies, and that's what we call a human body. And empowering that is 70 trillion human cells, but empowering that is 14 quadrillion mitochondria. And so we have such a force of light energy within us. There's so much information available and being processed any given millisecond in our bodies that allows us to self-organize space, vacuum space, into particles. And so we are a particle accelerator that accelerates the expression of light into particle. So therefore, we can become a physical body. And we're doing that every millionth of a second at such an intense energy demand that we have to burn 10,000 times brighter than the sun to maintain the process. And so watching ION, which is the intelligence of nature, is the brand, acronym ION, watching the intelligence of nature come alongside the biohacking movement, it's just put these two stark possibilities in the future. One is a technologic dystopian reality where we're implanting chips in people's brains, helping them with Parkinson's. The other is nature reconnecting to human biology, in which case there's no such thing as Parkinson's. And so we're going to have a dystopian patchwork of basically palliating the pain of being a disconnected human, or we have a biologic future. And so technology versus biology is our next question as a species. So are we going to trust a biologic future as possible for our planet? If so, then what's the biologic future for the humanity within that planet? And now we need to recreate everything. Every company needs to redesign itself. Every bank needs to redesign itself. Every government needs to redesign itself to ask the question of how do I become part of the solution? How do I become part of a biodiverse system that is feeding nutrients and information into human systems? Because we are the highest technology. If we get that right, we are going to go into an explosion of creativity. We're going into an explosion of human ingenuity and design within natural systems. Biomimicry is going to become the law of the land. We will not allow a single product to get to market unless we can show the biomimicry that it's following the laws of nature. If natural law is not expressed in your product, not expressed in the packaging, not expressed in the supply chain, the trucking, the distribution, every one of those industries has to now redesign within a natural system, understanding the power in carbon, the power in water, power in genetic information that we call viruses. If we start to glorify the beauty within these things instead of demonize them, we're going to get to start to create in this playground that is so beautiful and so vital that all of the problems that we have dreamed up they just dissolve in front of us. And there is no like linear process to fixing the human condition. It's an exponential reignition of life within us.
Just a quick question about ION in terms of, my understanding as well is that with autism, ADHD and things like that, there's a lot of, there can be heavy metals lodged in the brain. Does ION help kind of from that perspective as well? Because I know it's helping from the gut and the gut speaks to the brain. It must be dislodging some of these heavy metals.
Yeah, there's a lot of different mechanisms by which nature does this. So when the wireless communication network turns on, when you give back that cell signal, the human cells start doing all kinds of things that it naturally does. I think this is the only supplement on the market that does nothing to the human cell. It's literally designed to do nothing. The only thing it's there to do is provide the communication between one cell and the next. And so it doesn't force a cell to do anything. Vitamin D does. Like you take a vitamin D supplement and you've changed 2,000 genes almost instantly, and your whole body's trying to adjust to this megadose of vitamin D. And then you take megadose vitamin Bs, and now you've got 2,000 genes that are trying to adapt to this sledgehammer of B complex. And we know that that's not good for human biology. We proved in 2010 that multivitamins were increasing mortality in women. And so we've known for quite some time that this sledgehammer approach to nutrition is antithetical. It actually causes disease, not health. And yet we can't help but keep doing that. You walk into any supplement aisle and everything's doing something to your cells. Melatonin is making you sleep and things like this. We got to get back to a biologic reception where we are nurtured into our protected state of safety and biologic restoration rather than, sledgehammered in. And so this gentleness of nature is what we've been watching an eye on, is it's reinvigorating natural systems of communication. And so when that happens under the microscope, the first thing that you witness is protein synthesis. And so the number of proteins and the intelligence within the 480,000 different proteins that make up a human system accelerates. And so you're seeing glutathione increase, which is the primary antioxidant or anti-inflammatory pathways in your body. The amount of EDTA and other chelators that pull the heavy metals out of the system upregulate. And so all the enzymes, which are proteins, are kicked up into this higher state of production. And so the system is just literally resourced better within minutes. And it's like 3 minutes of the communication network in a petri dish. And suddenly human gut is making three-dimensional human structures, and like things are happening in petri dishes that never happened before, because we've always studied the human cells in isolation. You put those human cells back in a connected nature and they start doing things that you can't dream of. And suddenly the pharmaceutical model is obsolete because the cells just did deeper repair than could ever be affected by a chemical drug. And so this reconnection process is so invigorating to watch, and it induces such a deep trust. And then I'm excited about my own body, actually, because as the first person to be taking these substances and any sort of volume, and I was doing really high volumes because I was insane, which that part hasn't gone away. I'm still probably that. But when I found these molecules, I was like, oh my gosh, first of all, I didn't have much money. I was running on pennies on a dollar in my lab. So I didn't have couldn't do the clinical trial, do this. So I was just using my own body as the laboratory. So I started doing liters a day intravenously and all this crazy stuff to see what was happening in my own body, because we were already proving out that it was the safest substance that had ever been found. Water starts to cause toxicity to renal tubule cells at about 20% concentrations. So we did our first toxicity study with 20% concentration and saw that all the kidney tubules were living longer than they ever had before. And so we hadn't seen kidney tubule cell culture improve in its function since 1968. And so suddenly it was doing things we hadn't dreamed of. So we were like, well, we'll wonder what 50% would do. And things got even better. And then we did something crazy, which was grow 100% concentration. So we replaced the entire medium of the petri dish with these the liquid carbon molecules of water, and the product in its finished state is mostly water. It's 99% water with these carbon molecules all suspended in it, and then oxygen, hydrogen, some minerals added back in. But this colloidal structure is mostly water, and so it should be killing kidney tubule cells at 20%, and yet we can grow cells at 100% concentrations of this liquid supplement, and everything lives longer and connects more and does more intelligence than we can dream of. So in that journey, started to trust this system that was going on, and ultimately found out that it was doing very little in my body as an intravenous thing, and it was doing much more if I just took a small amount of it orally, because then it was connecting to the microbiome, the soil system within me, which is where this stuff comes from. And so it was setting up this cool feedback loop where a teaspoon in my mouth was doing more than a liter intravenously, because I was feeding the garden, and the garden is where my nutrition came from. And so I had to switch out of my chemotherapy mindset of more must be better, sledgehammer into health, to this subtlety of nature. It just takes a little bit of compost to reinvigorate the whole garden. And so as I started doing that, I got to watch my body get younger and younger physiologically. And amazingly, we actually got to physically watch it, because around the time that we were discovering these molecules, a colleague of mine, William, had brought in this camera from Russia that images the human energy field. And we ended up imaging tens of thousands of patients over time, over many years. And we have never found an individual that was more depleted than I was on the first time I got imaged. And so I had destroyed my own energy field so deeply after 17 years in academic medicine and working in ICUs 100 hours a week, and was so depleted as a medical doctor. And this had taken me to my knees. I was, suicidal, depression, everything else by the end of that journey. And so I was living this state of depletion at such a deep, deep level. And as I started getting these molecules back in my body, we got to watch my own, energetic matrix rebuild over time. And now, 15 years later, I'm enjoying a body that wakes up every single morning feeling better than I did 15 years ago. And I'm watching that contrast to all my colleagues over in the biohacking world. And I do no technology in my body. I've never done a peptide. I've never done stem cell infusions. I've never done all these IV drips of vitamin C and glutathione. Literally, it's just been so curious for me to watch nature doing its thing versus human technology doing its thing. And so I don't think anybody's going to believe me in the biohacking world for another 20 years, but I am blessed with a very accelerated life experience as well. My kids, 27 and 25, were on a very rapid rate of self-differentiation. And so they found themselves into college by 14, tested out of high school very quickly because they were homeschooled through and were just continued to be following their intuition. And when you let kids follow their intuition, like, they differentiate immediately into their path. They don't have to like go wonder what their purpose is or anything. Like, the concept of purpose is obsolete when you have intuition. You just are you, and you are now you expressing yourself in a world. The concept of you need to go find your purpose, that's a symptom of the fact that you're not you. You don't have to ask what your purpose is if you're you. And so it's for all these abstract roles that we play in society that we get so divided. So watching my kids tear through life, it put them on this accelerated path. My son married a woman about 9 years older than him. And so my daughter-in-law is this amazing being who has been the most extraordinary single mother. She met my son when her son was 14 or 4 years old. My son was 14 at the time. And watching them grow up together, like, all of them have shown me something so miraculous about life, in that humans connect not through belief systems. If you connect with the belief that you're looking for a husband, or a belief that you need somebody with a job, or you're going to be in a whole, cluster of dead ends and confusion. And if you become present and really know who you are, you're going to connect through some sort of other path, these deep remembrances of who you are. And when I watch my son and his journey with his wife, those are people that remember each other. They remember who they are in that relationship, and they're showing me a totally different path than I walked. Like, there's something there. And so my grandson is now, 18 years old, just graduated high school, just started college. His whole generation is showing me a different way of expressing itself outside of gender. It turns out as you keep dimming the lights on biology, the last symptom in that cascade, following neurologic disrepair, cancer, and then you get basically dissolution of gender in the womb, because to polarize a fetus into male or female takes a lot of energy, and you have to force cells from the center point, which is what all cells are at the beginning, into this polarized, imbalance in some ways to become masculine or feminine at the cellular level. There's an imbalance from neutral. And that takes an enormous amount of energy to push a human being into one gender or the other. And so as our light force within the womb is decreasing, we can no longer gender in the same way in the womb. And so these generations that are coming along now are ungendered in the same way because there was not enough energy to polarize them. And the beauty of my grandson's generation is they're coming into this world without polarity in the same way. And they're healing this conflict of the genders that has been baked in this wounded masculine that we've been running around with. And I'm watching my grandson show me what love looks like without polarity. And he's such an inspiration to me, and such, I think, an inspiration to the people around him. And so my son and my grandson and my daughter-in-law, this little family unit I'm watching is like, first of all, if you guys fortunately you never listen to my podcast, so I don't think you're going to hear this, but if you are, I just love you so much. And I'm so grateful for what you taught me. There's no science that can describe what you guys are displaying in this world. It's just a miraculous miracle to watch it all come to be.
You're quite extraordinary in everything you teach and how you truly feel and express your emotion. And I'm just feeling all of that and how that is part of this journey of you helping to heal the collective. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
On the subject of children, and you mentioned education, I spoke to some of my friends and asked what would be the questions that they would want to ask you. And, my amazing like-minded women that I have in my life, one of them asked if you'd marry them. But another one, she runs a homeschool community, and she's what I would call a community weaver. She's a sensational woman. We've been friends our whole lives. And she is trying with so much effort to build a community, this homeschool community, basically. And there's lots of challenges within it. And she wanted to know where you see, because, such a focus and emphasis on your work is about education. And where do you see education going for our children? How do you see it playing out in the future? How does it need to play out? And what do we as parents need to be doing to get ourselves there?
We have to shift from this education system to an experiential learning system where children are never disconnected from their intuition. And so we need to be asking our children what they're seeing, and then trust what they're seeing, and start to begin the process of deprogramming ourselves before we program our children. And this was said very well 100 years ago by Khalil Gibran. Khalil, one of the most amazing minds of the 20th century, was asked, how should we parent? And he said, it's very easy to parent well. You just, every day you strive to think more like your children, and you make absolutely sure you don't tell your children to think like you. And so that's what our current education system is forcing our children to think like us. And we need to lose that whole process, and we need to go to an experiential learning where we ask the children open-ended questions and look for their creative engagement. And that's what happened to my children is nature became their template. Their mother is a brilliant woman and an artist, and dedicated to nature in such a profound way in her art. And she witnesses beauty within nature in such a powerful way. And so she, as a homeschool experience, took our kids out in the woods every day where we lived and had them do a journal, and they had to write or draw something from nature every day. And that little simple practice, I think, really was what led my kids down their incredibly accelerated paths. And by 9, they both knew what they were going to do with their lives and what they were here to do. And by 14, they were in college and doing their things. And now in their 20s, they're ahead of 30 and 40-year-olds, knowing their path and expressing themselves and doing all this because they got so used to seeing themselves in the context of nature and seeing the beauty of nature from their mother. And so I really believe that this is what the future will look like is nature immersion. And in that nature immersion, we'll find our intuition. In the intuition, we'll find creativity. And creativity will begin to trust that we are part of the design of nature rather than the cancer on the planet. And for that retrust in our own role within nature, we'll stop the devastation of the human inhumanity, and we'll begin a humane path.
Mm. So I'm just going to end on one of the best things I learned from you during the whole COVID saga was about how we carry light within ourselves and we give that to other people, when we hug them. And so they're not hugging, and all of that was so unnatural, wasn't it? And just kind of, I guess, ending on that beautiful note of passing other people our light, which you do so beautifully. And
I hope so. I mean, I'm not, I've upset a lot of people. I've upset, women. I've upset men. I've upset a lot of people in my effort to open hearts and to open love, because I don't know how to do this either. Like, I'm just bumbling along trying to figure out how to do it. And so, there's women out there that are telling me that I hurt them, or I'm just trying to see her and witness your beauty. And in that, I'm going to open your heart. And that's not going to be pretty. Like, we're going to have a mess to deal with when we open these hearts. And so I just want everybody to take note of, like, we got to have a ton of grace towards each other right now. If we're going to do this thing together, if we're going to open our hearts and create a new humanity, we're going to have just have a huge moment of amnesty. Like, we are going to have to forgive each other deeply, because it's not going to be comfortable, and it is going to be a mess. And we're not going to be good at it initially, because we have to remember, and we have to practice remembering what it feels like to just be open and see each other for how beautiful we are, and really do that. And so just have mercy on me as an imperfect human, as an imperfect man, as a wounded man. I think, I hear a lot from women around the world, like these lines that form after I give a talk, and they call them hug lines, but really what they are is people just want to tell me their story of how they felt seen in something. And so they're always whispering in my ear these intense stories. And it's mostly women that are there. But the men that are coming into those lines now, those are my best hugs. I'm getting these hugs from men that are so open-hearted and so hungry for the exchange to happen. And so I just offer this up to the whole community. Is like, if you're frustrated at the men around you, which I don't blame you for, we're really frustrating to be around. But if you're frustrated at men, take into consideration the statistics that I saw this last week, which is 8 out of 10 men haven't been hugged this year.
Wow.
If 80% of the men are not being hugged, then what are we really expecting from them in this isolated state where they're being told they have to protect everything and provide everything? And they're not a provider or a protector because they're not the woman. And so we need to reverse roles here, and we need to start hugging men. And we need to start hugging men and being like, your job is to open hearts, not to protect anything. Open the heart by being still and learning how to be still. And be witness to the feminine within yourself. Be witness to the mother within you that wants to create something, birth something. And I want to honor all of the women that are on the planet right now that aren't birthing children. You are a mother as well. And if you're infertile right now, or you haven't found that partner, or life just hasn't taken you down that route of having a biologic child, I want you to know that you're here on great purpose, and your fertility is in a space that is much grander perhaps than just procreation. You're here to recreate humanity right now. You're here to rebirth the men and the women around you. And so start giving hugs and start trusting that your womb, that your energy field has the creative force to rebirth a whole species right now. You're here to birth something bigger than a child. You have to rebirth humanity. And I trust you. I trust you. If you've shown up as a woman on this planet right now, if you've shown up as a man right now, I trust that you're part of this matrix. I trust that you're part of this transformation. And it's not going to be messy, and I'm going to be afraid of you just as you're afraid of me, and we're going to have to push through that fear and guilt and shame trips that we want to put on each other. We're going to have to push through all of that, and we're going to have to start to hug each other just more consistently.
Beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much, Zach.
Glad to be with you all. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Reconditioned. I am honestly so grateful to each and every person that tunes in. Thank you also for taking responsibility for your own well-being. You should know that just by choosing to listen to podcasts like this that further your well-being, you're moving more deeply into abundance consciousness. Now, don't forget, I have a bunch of free resources over at laurenvakneen.co.uk, as well as every recommendation you could ever need in regards to your well-being on the LV Recommends page, all categorized for your ease. Thank you also to our sponsors. These episodes would not be possible without them, so make sure to check them out and get some pretty awesome discounts on the show notes. And of course, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so that you can get updated each time a new one is released. Thank you. I appreciate you.